Welcome to episode 114 of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Teslaw, and this is my first episode back from a much-needed, long overdue, and frankly required hiatus. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be talking behind the microphone again, and this episode was recorded earlier today. It's one of the fastest turnarounds I've ever done, I think, for a podcast episode. Recorded earlier today because it's so timely. And it wasn't the episode I expected to release first upon my return, but it seems now to be the most appropriate. So I'm going to get right into the episode. Most of you who've been listening to the show for some time know Traver, know about his work, know about his connection to this show from the very beginning. And with everything going on this week, all the chaos and the uncertainty and the anxiety that it can produce, I couldn't think of a better person to have on to talk about those things, how to navigate those things for ourselves, but also then how to lead through it. And like I say, for me, there's no one I'd rather talk to. There's no one I'd rather come back to this show with than Traver Boehm. So you can follow him on socials at Traver Boehm, TraverBoehm. And other than that, no ads tonight. No long intro, although I'm getting there right now. No intro music, no outro music, no ads cutting out in the middle of the show, because this is important, and I think that what we talk about here is very much needed. So hit us up on Facebook, socials, email us, let us know what you think of some of these things that we talk about today, about how to lead in these uncertain times, how to check in with yourself, how to give yourself some compassion, but also work towards some empathy for everybody else that's going through this with us. We are all in this together. And as the intro narrative says usually when I play it during the show, why us? Well, because no one else is coming. Traver, welcome back to the Squad Room.
Garrett, it is always a pleasure.
Yeah. Interesting times today. There's a lot. We're going to talk about this in depth. A lot to be nervous about. I'll be up front. I'm nervous because I haven't recorded an episode in 5 or 6 months. Like actual in-person interview like this.
Oh, wow.
So,
all right. Welcome back to the game, man.
Yeah, it's I'm shaking off the rust a little bit and working under slightly different recording conditions than what I'm used to, but we all are adapting these days to changes. So if you're hearing the audio is a little different, you're hearing, we're kind of rigged up a little differently today, but we're going to talk a lot about change and managing change and how we can have one foot in both strength and resiliency and another foot in acknowledging the anxiety that's going on.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be really good to start today with something that just popped up in the Squad Room closed groups, the Squad Room Facebook closed group, And for listeners who aren't part of that group, go over to Facebook and search the Squad Room podcast. You can join our group, and it's really a cool spot. And Ron Everett, who's a member and a listener not too far from me here in California, posted something that I just thought was apropos for the moment and something that we could use as a jumping off point for our discussion today. Ron works for his union in addition to his other duties, and he posted something to his union today that I just thought was just on point. So I'm going to read it, dry mouth and all, and bear with me through the spot here. But this is Ron Everett, listener of the Squad Room, member of our group, fantastic guy. Just love what he says here. All. As I think about the unprecedented circumstances over the past week, I am reminded that we are not the first to endure difficult and uncertain times. In the last week, we've experienced the first midterm school shutdown, followed by a first-ever moratorium on bars and restaurants serving alcohol through St. Patrick's Day, and a county-wide shelter-at-home order looms in the hours ahead. The stock market has crashed. Recession, depression, talks are in the news. Travel, sports, and nearly every other social activity has been canceled. There are lines at the grocery store for the first time in our lives in this country. Although these are the first-time experiences for almost all of us, we are not alone. Others have come before us who have endured uncertain and difficult times, and we need only look at them for guidance on how they overcame similar and far worse circumstances. I think of our grandparents, the greatest generation, who endured pestilence, economic collapse, followed almost ironically by war, atrocity, and Holocaust. If ever a people had reason for uncertainty and fear, it was this generation. They are not being asked to wash their hands with soap and watch Netflix for a couple weeks at home. My latest motivational quote was inspired by Sir Winston Churchill's speech to the House of Commons in June of 1940. I only posted the last sentence on my board, but the preceding paragraph is worth considering. Nazi Germany had conquered all of Europe. The United States had not yet joined the war and stood silent, still neutral. Great Britain stood alone against overwhelming odds, following a crushing defeat at Dunkirk. After rescuing the remains of the British Army at France, Churchill had this to say to his parliament: "The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves, that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. We are poised for a profound opportunity to offer strength and hope to our community that is looking for leadership to help guide them through the fear. The thin blue line is not a cool flag or a clever saying. We are called to stand and divide between order and chaos. Although the virus can be deadly, I see the fear in our communities as the greatest risk to order. Fear, like the virus, is very contagious, but so is hope. The quiet confidence of our mere presence and professionalism can inspire hope in our community. This may well be our finest hour if we accept this burden of leadership in these trying times. Be safe, be brave, take care of yourselves and your families as we all sort through the impact of this pandemic, both personally and professionally. As others have endured far worse, we will get through this. Our children will return to school, sports and social activities will resume, and our lives will return to normal. We have everything we need to endure these difficult and unprecedented times. Ron. I was so moved by what Ron wrote, and that he was kind enough to share that and then agreed to let me share that with the audience, and wanted to get your first reaction to that. You hadn't heard that until I read it, so that's this.
No, I haven't heard it. I think it's true. I think it's true on so many levels. From the fact that, like, I'm under no lockdown other than, the basics, but I still have access to Whole Foods, right? Like, this is the level of suffering going on in Denver, Colorado right now. I can still get organic grass-fed, like butter, like rubbed ribs and eat them. And I have internet and I have a cell phone and heat and etc. And so I look at this whole thing a couple different ways, Garrett. There is a massive challenge facing the populace. There's a massive challenge facing a lot of individuals and families. And then there's a health issue. I think he nailed it. And right, like most people, I know a couple people who have had corona. They're like, yeah, it sucks. And it was fevery and I couldn't breathe for a couple days, and I was wheezing and coughing and shit, and I didn't feel good, and now I'm okay. And you go, oh, that's fascinating. And I think for those people who don't get it, what will be of equal challenge is the speed of change that's come into their lives, the complexity of challenge that they now have to deal with, and the personal mirror that's getting held up to any deficiencies or cracks in their foundation. Like, that's the real deal. Is okay. And then the flip side of that is, for every challenge, there's equal, if not more, opportunity. And we need to one, acknowledge and be really honest about the challenge and say that this is unprecedented times in our lives. And my grandparents, if they were alive, might have been like, this is nothing. But for a lot of us, just the speed and complexity of change, like that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll rattle your central nervous system. And we've watched over the past, 5, 6 days, how quickly change has come. And I think we're in for even more change. And when people are actually listening to this, that change may have come.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's always challenging if I look back at fighting and go, if I throw a jab cross hook at you, you had to deal with my hands. If I throw a jab cross kick elbow and then I shoot in and try to take you down, the complexity of that series is often why it works, because the brain's like, wait a minute, hands, feet, elbow, what's hips, what's going on here? And it feels like that's what's hit a lot of people, of like, I'm sequestered in my house and now I have to look at a couple different systems in my life. My health system, how is it? What can I do to keep it up? What am I doing preventatively? What am I doing home alone if I do get this? What am I doing to counteract it?
Mm-hmm.
That's one system. Then I have the financial system of, okay, where is my money going to come from in the next 8 weeks? What happens to my clients? Are they still hiring me? Are people still buying my book? What's the general sense afterwards socially? And then, now I have to deal with the system of I'm home alone, potentially for weeks at a time. Am I going to go nuts? Am I going to start drinking a 6-pack a day and jerking off all over the place? Like, how am I going to deal with me? And I'm unique and isolated, where you're at home with a family, which I imagine has its own, a different set of challenges, let's call it,
right,
and a different set of benefits as well. I know that was a mouthful to a short question, but I think he's right.
Yeah.
Panic is still my biggest fear with all this is what happens if people lose their shit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the only thing more unpredictable than a virus that you can't see is humans that you can. As you know, you're in like, this is your bread and butter, dude. Like,
yeah.
You guys exist because we can't keep our shit together. And,
Right.
That's crazy. Why would someone do something so stupid? Oh, that's why we need police.
Right.
So there have been times, I'll be quite honest, over the past week that I have been afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I have been overwhelmed with anxiety of like, oh shit, what happens if? And kind of found myself tumbling down that wormhole
Mm-hmm.
and going, it's okay, relax, take a breath, actually assess what's true and what's not true,
Mm-hmm.
and then take a little bit of action and see what you can do here.
In my community, in law enforcement, we are the ones who are uniquely obligated to handle that situation, right? And I think Ron and everyone else who's made this point is on point, that I'm not worried as much about the virus as the people who are losing their minds over toilet paper at Costco, right?
Sure.
And then the panic that devolves into, right? And it's
Right.
not a far leap between the shelves at Costco being empty of toilet paper to the social chaos and social disorder
Mm-hmm.
that comes when people panic. And
Right.
so what I think is our biggest challenge right now is being in a place where we can manage to address these functions, but also acknowledge our own change and our own anxiety out of this, right?
Yeah,
because as you noted, like, I'm at home with kids, and I'm in a fortunate position right now where I might have the only job in my department that I can telecommute.
Yeah.
And that's not going to last for very long, but as bad luck would have it, or luck would have it, I was telling you right before we started recording, I came down with a viral lung infection 2 weeks ago. Not COVID,
Mm-hmm.
but just your run-of-the-mill winter like fluish cold.
Mm-hmm.
And as this was all kicking off, I decided to basically self-quarantine for 14 days, but I was able to continue to do some work. And in that, and you talk about the speed of change, I was homesick for a couple of days, and by the end of that week, my kids' school had closed down, my wife's work had closed down, she was now working from home, and we are now all packed into the house trying to negotiate this quote-unquote new normal, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do have to go back to work. Most guys and girls in this profession are already at work. They haven't got a break yet. If in fact, they're working overtime behind the people that have self-quarantined, or they're, they're playing civil disobedience keeper with the people at Costco because they can't mind their manners. So to me, this is a really unique event in a lot of ways, but for us, it's because there's professional change and then there's personal change. And we have to navigate both. And this job is so unique in how the two intersect in our lives. You can't, there's no such thing as being a cop when you're on duty and then not being one at home. It just doesn't work that way. And anyone who says they can bifurcate the two, I'd love to have on the show for you to explain to me how, because just the nature, like what I mean by that is like, I go to work, if I get pulled into uniform to cover a shift, I go to work, I'm exposed to certain things like this. I then come home and bring it home to my family. My wife now has that worry that I've been exposed to something or that I've had to interact with in this way. My kids might be exposed to it. It's not the same as some accountant who shuts down the office, right? And then works from home and can work completely sequestered. We don't have that option. So how do we navigate these changes, this anxiety that is building in all of us? And so I really liked Ron's point to our role in this and to look at this as our finest hour. This is our opportunity to show people what we are capable of in terms of our compassion, especially with the fear that's out there, but also that it's okay to acknowledge our own fear, right?
For sure.
And I know of all people, you'll agree with that.
Yeah, for sure.
How do we do that? I mean, I think the first step is obviously acknowledging, as you've said recently, it's okay to be afraid.
Yeah.
But not letting that take over. How do we do that?
I think the best way to do it is to acknowledge it, right? That which we suppress comes out sideways. Period. Fucking period. So if we sit there with a shaky hand and say, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, that will come out in other behavior. You'll have to reduce that anxiety in a way that's not upfront, right? I want to know what's in front of me. As a human, as a fighter, as a man, I want to face what's in front of me. In order to do that, I have to acknowledge what's in front of me.
Yeah.
Right. In the example I gave, like I wouldn't tell people to just walk around their house if their house was on fire and say, it's not on fire. It's not on fire. This is great. It's not on fire. It's nice. It's on fucking fire. I also wouldn't scream in their faces and get them to freeze or advocate that they panic and start sprinting around to all corners of the building. Just leave the building. But first you have to acknowledge. And I think that's for your community, especially the male community within your community and the male community at large, is just taking an opportunity to say, you know what, for this one, I'm allowed to be afraid. And I'm going to drop whatever the culture norm is. And I may not be openly weeping in the locker room out of fear, but I have people in my life I can call out of the department, close friends in the department, a partner, and say, like, yeah, this is, it is pretty fucking scary right now. Yeah. And then it's in the middle of the room. Then you can look at it.
I think it's important too to note that fear or acknowledging fear doesn't mean lack of action. Right?
No.
In fact, if anything, it can kind of focus action.
100%.
Right. So
you get to deal with it. It's one of the ingredients you're now working with, as opposed to pretending that it's not in there.
Yeah.
Right. So let's get over the ego or the cultural aspect of, let's just call it machismo in any profession.
Right.
When there's a pandemic, suddenly you guys are supposed to leave your humanity or bypass your humanity or not have your humanity front and center.
Right.
Which would, trust me, will lead to other issues. Yeah. It's why I'm so angry at the spiritual community right now with the level of bypassing and gaslighting.
What do you mean?
Of posts going out and people saying, if you feel fear and anxiety right now, it's not the virus that's bringing this on. That was in your vibe. That was in your field. Your job is just to generate pure faith and love, and then things like the virus won't affect you. And I literally want to drive to their houses and go, punch them right in the nose and be like, oh, I'm sorry, nasal pain. That must have been in your vibe or in your field or whatever, you fucking nitwit. Let's stop that nonsense and go, we don't get to bypass our own humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Period, fucking period. If you're in a biological unit that looks a lot like mine or yours, you're human. Therefore, that's going to come with inherent patterns.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is when sudden change comes, we get anxious because sudden change often down the line can lead to death. If sudden change comes from a number of different angles, it's even more terrifying because we don't have one area to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So for you guys, right, you also, not only do you have to deal with the potential of panic in the populace, you're going to have to deal with, okay, what if my spouse loses her job? Who's home watching my kids right now?
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at stress, like like I have a bottle of kombucha in front of me. If normally it's like deal with the human population at their worst, which is what you guys do every day, that's 3/4 of the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've also added another half to the bottle, which is kids, wife, someone just lost a job. By the way, everybody in the neighborhood is now unemployed. Then that bottle's overflowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we explode. That's when we do shit we don't want to do. That's when we, get in a fight in a park. That's when we do shit that you guys get called to come help us regulate.
Right.
Thank you again for your work, by the way.
To open that analogy a little bit for people to understand, like your bucket can only hold so much, right? Whether and this is something I've only learned in the last couple of months, but your bucket and my bucket are different sizes, right? Or they might be. And if I have a smaller or larger bucket than you, it's no personal fault about how big or small my bucket is. And then from that, we fill that bucket, right? And you say that we fill that thing with institutional stress, with the vigilance that's required to go out. We fill that nowadays with these changing SOPs or policies on our job, because like you just said, our job is changing by the hour. I mean, I'm getting hourly changes to what we are supposed to be doing at work, right? Whether it comes to reducing car stops, to eliminating certain kinds of arrests, to releasing inmates from the jail, to handling reports by phone. These things are all changing, and each of those changes, good or bad, either takes or adds to our bucket. And as we add family issues and the schools are closed and now we're trying to entertain our kids or even educate them or work from home or have a spouse that now has to work from home with and juggle the kids. Like our bucket is most absolutely being filled at this point, if not straight from the spigot.
You can blame the firemen.
We always blame the firemen. And so what I'm uniquely interested in this conversation, but also at this time in my own life, is recognizing when that bucket starts to spill over, and how you touched on it a minute ago, but the things that we do when that bucket starts to spill over before we are able to sit with whatever it is that's causing it to spill.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't long ago I had a conversation with you when you were like, just, sit with it. And I'm like, how do you sit with it? Like, I didn't understand or grasp the idea of sitting with the anxiety of it. And I do now after a lot of work on it. But I think that's still an elusive idea to people. So I wanted to touch on some of the things because you work with a lot of guys and you see them. They come to you at that moment where that bucket is starting to drip over, if not pour over, right? And so what are the things that the listeners should be on the lookout for in their own behavior and their own attitudes, and say, you know what, my bucket's pretty full right now?
Yeah. We always go back to the body. So you're going to get these sensations in the body. The body's going to give you reactions. So first test is, how are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? Are you not sleeping? Are you suddenly waking up 5 times in a night? Are you eating? Are you going to the bathroom? Do you have a sex drive? Right? Is there a sense of tightness in the chest? Is there tightness in the body? Right? So the body's the first canary in the coal mine.
Right.
And, how is my gut throughout the day? Do I have indigestion? Am I my bowel movements all screwed up? Okay, something's going on here. Like any biological change. Then it's behavioral change. Man, I can't believe I just snapped at my spouse. I can't believe I just yelled at my kids over something that was so stupid. I can't believe walking into the office when someone looked at me, I felt this rush of heat go up from my stomach into my chest, into my face of anger.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really monitoring what's going on inside of you. And then what do you do with it is the number one thing which we touched on just a few minutes ago is acknowledge it.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, yeah, it doesn't matter that I'm not sleeping. It doesn't matter that like I'm yelling at my kids. It doesn't matter that I'm like feel like I'm going to throw up a couple times a day or I get dizzy or whatever. And just get rid of the egoic part of you that's like, I'm not supposed to feel that shit. You are. So the noticing and then the immediate desire to quell it.
Mm-hmm.
So I said that which we suppress goes out sideways. So it's, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Okay, what are my options here? I can crack a beer. You guys can't smoke joints. I don't think. It's California, maybe you can.
Not as of this recording, anyway.
So don't do that. Crack a beer, numb out some other way. How are you going, what if I actually started asking myself what's at the root of this? And we're talking about a 5-minute process here. We're not talking about like, okay, go live on an island for a month with a journal and figure out what are your triggers. It's, okay, shit, what's filling my bucket? And then are there things in the immediacy that I can do? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are stuck home with their spouse. A lot of people are stuck home with their children. Can you just go to your spouse and acknowledge, hey, this is going to be a challenging period. I really appreciate that you're stuck here with me too. I noticed I was a little cranky this morning. I just want to apologize for that. And then walk the fuck away. Mm-hmm. It's not a discussion then of like, well, you said this and this and this. And it's just like, hey, this is hard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Acknowledge. Just put it in the middle of the room for everybody. Hey, kids, guess what? We're in a really unique situation. And sometimes mom and dad we're going to be a little snappy right now. Still love you. I apologize. And then watch what that does to your own physiology. One, watch what it does to the room because everybody knows. Mm-hmm. But two, then watch what happens in your own body. Mm-hmm. Of, what happens if you get on the phone with me and say, you know what, man, I am scared out of my mind. I am terrified. I'm nauseous. I'm shitting myself. I can't sleep. My wife's driving me nuts. I stepped on a Lego this morning. I just want to Hulk smash everybody. And then go, Garrett, I hear you, man. And then see how you feel. Mm-hmm. Like we forget that we use these terms. I just need to unburden myself. I'm carrying around all of this weight. Let me take some of that for you. And this is the beauty of friendship, partnership, etc. Where there are days when I'm like, bro, I feel like I got 400 pounds. You can put it right on my back. Do it. Mm-hmm. And then the next morning I'm going to call you and be like, Garrett, I feel like my life's falling apart. I don't know why I'm here. I think people are going to break into my house tomorrow and steal all my fucking Whole Foods food. Like, can you help me out? And you're just going to listen. So it's that, man. But if we don't acknowledge it, like to get to your point, where does it start? If I call you and I go, hey, how are you? And you're like, great. How are you? Good. Cool. What do you think's going to happen with Tom Brady?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Then we don't address it. And that anxiety is going to sit in us. Mm-hmm. Stress is going to sit in us. This is supposed to be stressful. It's a fucking pandemic.
Right.
It is a worldwide invisible enemy that changes all the time that we can't see. We don't know if it's 10 feet, 3 feet. We don't know if we even have it. It's all the things. It's the perfectly designed enemy. Mm-hmm. And yet some segment of the population is supposed to just be chill with it. Like, imagine explaining this to a kid or to an alien. Like, oh, we're the police. We just don't have those feelings that the general population has because we wear these uniforms and they're magic. But actually, that's not true.
Right. Yeah. I think too. I go back to this as on an organizational idea and on the leadership concept of it is that, I've got kids to worry about. Obviously, I've got a wife who has her own feelings about all this. But for those of us who are in charge of or lead other people, we have that same obligation to them there at work, right? And to check in with those people on that same level. Just because we're not related by blood doesn't mean that we don't have an obligation to do that for our people too. And then for the leaders to understand everyone's bucket's pretty full right now.
Yeah.
And if you got a guy who is not producing or is calling in sick or whatever. It's like this is the best opportunity any of us could ever have to practice more patience, right?
100%.
And to understand those things. But I think it's key for the leaders too to know to watch out for those warning signs when that bucket starts to drip, right? Because when we do that, we can we probably could save someone's job.
Mm-hmm.
We can keep them out of a lawsuit. We can keep them gainfully employed or gainfully married, right?
Yeah.
And cops are famous for impaired decision making as a result of the chronic stress that we go through, right? And that goes down to alcoholism, to extramarital affairs, to all the other risky behaviors that happen with exposure to chronic stress. And we need to be on the lookout for each other for those things. Like you said, sleep disturbances, it seems to start there. Those, if you're making bad decisions and you see a buddy making them, it's time to pull them aside and ask them those questions you just asked about, check in with them.
Yeah.
A lot of guys, and I say guys, but of course I mean women too, but I think in my profession, I think a lot of people feel anxious, but they don't understand what that feeling is. Does that make sense? But they don't know why they feel different, and they don't know why they feel on edge.
Yeah.
And sometimes anxiety is just a kind of a generalized feeling. But feeling that sort of, I think the best way to describe it is feeling that need to be rushed, like you're rushed to do something. You're rushed to finish your tasks or your chores or your paperwork, and you just got to get it done. If you're feeling that in your day-to-day life, that's a good flag, a good clue that you need to step back, check in, and maybe figure out ways that you can empty that bucket a little bit. Hypervigilance, that's something we already deal with. But hypervigilance and anger go hand in hand. And I think, our tempers, we got to watch out for our temper and be mindful of the fact that if we're snapping at people, especially the public and our family, but if we're snapping at people, is it legitimate? Is it something that's in the moment, or is it more this generalized anxiety? But then again, to try and find ways to practice that patience. And I think for me, the thing I keep going back to is just that like number one rule of control what you can control.
Right.
And to the point where writing out the things that you can control, right? I can't control the decisions my admin makes, but I control how I react to it. I control my 10 fingers and toes and my mind, and that's where I have my influence. So wanted to talk a little bit too about the things you feel like people can do to empty that bucket a little bit right now.
For sure. The concept, I think this is all going to fall under, Garrett, is, we all have to learn to self-regulate before we'll ever learn how to co-regulate. Meaning, I need to know how to control my own system before I can control my actions in a relationship with you, a partner, my boss, or the public. So what we're talking about here is self-regulation practices. That's you looking in the mirror in the morning and first doing an inventory, taking stock, taking a breath before you go on to your job and saying, how am I? Oh, wow, I'm not okay. Or I'm actually, I feel great. It's if I'm not okay, then the practice and the skill of regulating yourself, of saying, okay, what can I do right now? What can I do today? Right? I'm stuck in a house for a couple of days. I've done a fuck ton of burpees and push-ups because that's how I'm going to regulate all of this extra energy I've got going on. So it's a matter of a meditation practice. I know we've talked about this for years.
Yeah.
It's a 5-minute meditation practice, right? It's a 5-minute journal session to dump your feelings and your thoughts. It's I've done this a ton of times publicly. Okay, 2-word check-in, guys. How do you feel and what do you most need right now? And I'll get 50 guys in my membership group being like, anxious, someone to tell me it's okay. Okay, need to go to the gym. Like, feeling sad, like, would love a hug. So just having that insight. How do you feel right now? And then what do you need most? And is that thing you need most, can you give it to yourself, honestly? So if it's like, it's a hug, yeah, you can kind of give it to yourself, but it just looks fucking awkward. So just go ask someone for a hug. If it's I need 2 weeks off, that may not be applicable to the situation because you simply can't in your line of work. But you can say, can I take a 5-minute, just close eyes, headphones on, breath before I walk into the office today? Can I listen to that song that calms me down? Number one, I would say over and over and over is, how do you move? How can you move? Like, you got to move. And it may not be punching a punching bag. It may not be doing burpees and push-ups and something else hard. It's just going to be movement, like literal. Can you stretch in the morning? Can you do yoga? Can you swing your arms? Can you Michaela Boehm teaches nonlinear movement, which is literally this idea. Put on some music and then just move your body in really weird ways. However you want to move. I don't care if it looks stupid. I've done it plenty of times myself. But that's the biggest means, the most effective means I know of self-regulation is movement. And then the second is, I know it's a scary word for all people, especially for you guys, but some kind of intimate contact. Meaning, not sex, but like, Garrett, I'm scared. Like a real conversation. How are you doing right now, really? Like, throw that word on the end of it when you ask people, like, hey, how are you doing? I used to ask people, like, how are you doing as a human? Right? I'd have these great business meetings with Jamie Thompson, the sex coach. And I'd be like, how are you? She'd be like, my course is selling, my this. I'd be like, Jamie, how are you doing as a human? Like, oh, you know what? I'm a little fucked up right now. I just broke up with this guy, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it was. And it was like, here we were on the surface, which is where a lot of us like to live, and we don't want to admit that there's anything going on below the surface.
Yeah, it's easier.
Yeah, and movement will also unlock some of what is there. Like, oh, wow, I did my push-ups this morning, and I realized just how angry I am. And then the opportunity presents itself to acknowledge, admit, share, right? Like, how many times have you been with a buddy and been like, I'm fucking pissed? And he's like, good. Like slaps you on the back or like laughs or like, ooh, Luca's really pissed. And then like 2 minutes later, like, all right, I feel so much better. Thanks. I just need to tell somebody.
Right.
So self-regulation, man.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts to add, and want your opinion on this too. But I think one of the things we struggle with in this self-regulation and kind of that check-in, right? Once you learn how to do that and to just kind of acknowledge what you're feeling, the way to do that is as much, I agree, 100% agree that movement is crucial, but we also have to institute some stillness, right? And what I mean in that, and I know you agree with that before I said it, but what I mean by that is develop the ability to just sit for a couple of minutes and just, kind of take a breath. I'm not even talking meditation, but give yourself a chance to think and respond versus think and react, because one of the traps that I fell into was that I packed my days full of activity, and I mistook that activity as positive movement, like you're talking about. Like I'm just constantly doing things, constantly producing, doing podcasts, doing other stuff, writing, working overtime, and I'm staying busy and I'm moving. And on the surface, it looks like I'm being productive and it looks like I'm being creative and all those things. But what it was doing was giving me an excuse to not be still. And at some point, once I learned that and then the ability to be still, that's how I then understood how to do the check-in, and how to then also crucially understand that whatever you're experiencing as that emotion, whether it's fear, or anxiety, or you're feeling good, you feel happy even in a time like this, it's possible. Whatever that is, it's valid, right? And it has to be that way because it's not any other way. Right. And so I think we often really trip ourselves up by thinking, I feel sad right now, but I have no reason to be sad. So it can't be that I'm sad. I'm just being a pussy. Right. Like, no, being sad is valid. Right. Being scared right now is valid. It doesn't mean you have to give in to it. It doesn't mean you have to just lay down on the floor and curl up in a ball and cry yourself to sleep. But but acknowledging that as a valid thing, I think is such a skill that we have to learn.
Yeah. I hope people hear this and really, really take it in, that you cannot move away from it until you acknowledge it. You cannot move through it, rather, until you acknowledge it. So you get, I imagine there are things in your department You're like, God, I wish this would change, but no one will acknowledge that it even exists. That's the same thing that happens internally.
Mm-hmm.
And so the breath check-in, right? I would love it if I don't know if you guys still do a roll call in the morning. If I was God, I would tell whoever's running that meeting every morning, everybody takes 5 deep breaths. The one guy that laughs gets kicked out, and then you go around to everybody and say, okay, one word, eyes closed. How do you feel really? And no commenting, no poking, none of the other bullshit that erodes the fact that people actually just admitted their feeling and probably took the biggest step towards group mental health that a police department's ever taken. Mm. You got to acknowledge it, man. And if I could give all of you a permission slip, every cop in the whole, and every first responder in the whole world right now, it would say permission granted to be human. Mm. And then slide that across the table. Mm. Because if you don't, then you're going to break down. And then you don't get to do what you love to do the most, which is be of service. Yeah. So it's, if you are not of service to yourself right now, you can't be of service to us. And then the whole thing, then there's all kinds of different challenges.
Then the whole system collapses.
The whole system collapses, right?
Right.
This is a trying time, man. And people who won't admit it are just in denial. That we just don't cope with rapid change that well as a species. Mm. We'll adapt to anything, but we're not in the adaptation phase. We're not in the new normal phase yet. Like, I looked at a journal entry I had like 6 days ago, and it was nothing to do. It was just like, courses are selling. Can't wait to get to Europe. Right? Like,
right.
Doing a speech in Amsterdam. This is going to be awesome. Then there's like a gap, and things are now different.
Right. Yeah.
Okie dokie then. Things are now radically different. As an intelligent human, I can tell you why that happened. Mm-hmm. Biologically, my system's like, oh, whoa. We are going to need a little more time to sort through some of this shit, mister. I got it all figured out because I read CNN. Okay, so you like separate upstairs, downstairs here. Mm-hmm. And your feeling state is the one that's really accurate. Right? Again, you said it, like, it's a yes and. Yes, I'm sad and I have to go to work. So let me acknowledge that as opposed to pretending I'm not. Yes, I'm tired and I have to go to work. At least acknowledge it. And if you can regulate around it, regulate around it. Regulate with it. Mm-hmm. Manage it. Right? Write it. Speak it. Voice note it. Yell it in the car. I was furious 2 days ago for no reason. Just fucking rage-filled, Garrett. And thought, I'm anxious. I'm nervous. I'm upset. I'm scared. I'm pissed that my whole year got shuffled in 72 hours. I'm pissed at every power that be, and that even though they're doing the best that they can, I don't feel like they're doing a good enough job. I don't give a fuck why. I'm pissed.
Right.
And so just sat in my truck and yelled for 2 minutes. I went, oh man, that felt really great. I'm really happy now. But imagine being like, no, that was stupid. You shouldn't be pissed. Remember, you know how to meditate. You have a meditation course. You've read books on Zen. You're the dude that sat in the dark room. And then unloaded on someone in the supermarket 2 days later. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Yeah. That's not me.
Yeah. It's, and it can be devious too, right? Like all those things. Our bucket spills over. Not always out of the spigot, right? Off the sides too, and the idea of driving and road rage. That's an obvious one, right? You're saying horrible, vile things about the person in front of you, and you realize, I don't even know this person. I don't know what they're going through.
Nothing to do with me.
And I did it. I remember I did it with someone who walked past me outside my yard. Some homeless dude drinking a beer, walking down my street. I'm not too happy about that, and I'm giving him the mad dog, and then realized, yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that in general, but I'm also overreacting to it because I'm just wound. I'm wound pretty tight right now, and realized it was a missed opportunity for me to practice a little patience and compassion with that person too. Yeah. There's. Recently, I'm talking about this maybe on the next episode, but real quickly was, I had wrist surgery in the beginning of January, back when the world was just, wide open and you could go anywhere. And so anyway, I was home for 6 weeks, and the surgery was on my gun hand, so I couldn't really do much of anything because my strong hand's in a cast. And it was a beautiful opportunity because I sat at home, unable to podcast, unable to type, unable to do all the honeydew chores around the house, that required a strong arm. Couldn't work because my hand's in a cast. And I got back to a lot of regulation things that I'd let go. And ways of, I mean, that's really where I began to understand the idea of checking in and sitting with it, but also the physicality part, but also the importance of taking time to be quiet, and also being outdoors. I think that's a big thing. We can still be outdoors right now. Yeah, you just can't be in groups, but to get fresh air and to get vitamin D. But to me, I forgot how important it was for me to be out somewhere where I could touch the dirt, right? And I could be immersed in some sort of environment where I was out in nature, and that's very grounding to me. And I think it is for most anyone if they acknowledge that,
True. Huge piece. Yeah. One of my old teachers used to say, 3 weeks alone in the woods, if you don't starve, will solve all your problems.
I believe it. Right?
If you don't starve or freeze.
So where do we go as, your audience is predominantly male, mine is predominantly male, but I don't want to focus it through that lens, but more so because to acknowledge the efforts and work of all of our listeners and all of our followers.
Right.
Where do we go from here as leaders in our own tribes?
There's never been a bigger opportunity to lead, from micro to macro, right? So your kids are watching you.
Yes.
They're watching how you respond in a time of national crisis. Your wife is watching you. The people who work under you at the department are watching you. Us public are watching you. And so I think I literally, when this all started going down heavily, had a jolt of very aggressive thought of fuck yes. Because every dude who's ever taken a workshop, who's ever read a book on masculinity, who's ever read a book on leadership, like this is the time in our lives. There may be another one down the line, but this is the time when to go, okay, guess what? Time to figure out who the fighters are and who the spectators are. Mm-hmm. And you guys have all read a lot of books on fighting. So either get your ass in the fucking cage or put the books down and walk away. And most guys are going, yeah, that's right. It was about times like this. The masculine men, for the first time in my internet history, I read a post the other day that said, men, we need you. And went, well, motherfuckers. Looks like the narrative's changed a little bit, hasn't it? Huh? Not hearing a whole lot about toxic masculinity this week, am I? No, it's time for men to go, okay, we may not have to stand outside with guns. Again, we may not have to be required for our paychecks, but we are required to bring a grounded sense of calm, which is the masculine, in the greatest sense of chaos that the world has ever known, or the world has known in the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. So what an opportunity. So it's like literally we've gone from the practice field. Okay, guys, guess what? The game just started. All of you are in it, period. Whether you want to be or not, you're in the game. Mm-hmm. And so we were practicing for years, hoping that the game came. This is the game.
Yeah.
Get the game. So I think we start looking, Garrett, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, how are we leading ourselves? Like all the little stuff, right? Like I'm waking up and I'll be honest, for months I didn't drink a glass of water before I had my cup of coffee. I'm drinking my glasses of water. I'm putting vitamin C in it, right? I'm making sure that my morning routine is locked in. I'm choosing only good foods to eat right now. As opposed to like, you know what? Like, I'm hungry. I'll grab a Snickers. It's taking the dial up 10% only of personal care. personal decision, being very vigilant about what information am I taking in?
Yeah.
What am I ingesting?
Right.
Am I sucking down CNN and fear-based media? Or am I finding stuff like this, like podcasts like yours, stuff that's inspirational? Because our biology is going to react to what we read, see, and hear immediately. But that information may, like, okay, 500 more people died in Italy today. If I know that, and my cortisol levels spike, and my immune system drops, then I've actually negatively affected myself.
Mm-hmm.
When those 500 people, I'm so sorry for them, but I didn't know them. They had no other effect on, except for the effect that I allowed myself to undergo by ingesting that.
Mm-hmm.
So to go from, again, micro to macro, from the little things, like take care of yourself. Look for the places you can lead your family, make sure they feel, these are the words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Safety, certainty, community, hope, levity. Like those 5, I have those written on a Post-it note. Because when this all happened, I sat down. I was like, okay, what do people need? As someone who's in service to the world, what does the world need most right now? That's in my skill set. I'm not figuring out a cure for this thing. Like D- in college chemistry. It ain't going to be me, guys.
Right.
But I can put out content
Mm-hmm.
that helps people. I can teach meditation. I've been leading live streamed meditations in the morning that more and more people are showing up to. Why? Because they want a sense of community, and they want a sense of, okay, if only for a half an hour I feel okay in the world, I'll take that. Mm-hmm. That's me leading with my unique skill set, and by looking at the problem and saying, how do I apply what I'm good at and I can still do from home from here now?
Right.
That's what I think it is.
You know, too, and I agree with that 100%. And I want to add to that, but yes, and I want to add to that because I think I understand your philosophy better than most, and this may be the first time some people have heard you on the show, is that you uniquely have the perspective that each of us embodies masculine and feminine traits, right? I mean, that's not unique. I mean, that's kind of ingrained, but that we can tap into those things regardless of our sex, and that each of those things serve us well. And so, in addition to the masculine traits you were talking about, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would consider things like compassion and empathy and patience to be on the feminine side of that. But those are so needed right now too, right? We need our Renaissance man, for lack of a better term. We need that man, that uncivilized man, as you call it, to be there for us right now. Yeah.
For sure. I have a post going up in the next day or two called Yin for the Win, because the yin and yang, right? Most people hear it yin and yang, but it's pronounced yin and yang. We have been in such a hyper yang state as a culture, as a society, especially as men, especially as your profession, right? How many guys start their day with, 2 Red Bulls and a cup of coffee, which is just like instant yang. And we don't have the yin, which is nurturance, which is quiet, which is slow, which is compassion, which is empathy, which is understanding. It's your maternal aspects almost, which, what do you know? The world and the earth is actually making us all engage in. We all have come, the whole planet has come to a stop. Because, oh, you guys are really you think you could sprint forever? Okay, now you get to sit down for a while. And now you get to quiet down for a while. Oh, now you have to actually communicate. Yin, 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 yin. I think that cultivating both sides of the coin here, especially with ourselves, self-compassion. Right? If you snap at someone, it's okay. We're in a fucking pandemic. Like, remember the permission to be human card I just gave you? Pull that out again. Pull that out quite often. Yeah. And have access and cultivate access to both right now. Right? And again, brother, connection. You were not in this alone. Like, especially for your profession. Talk to each other, please. If you can't talk to your supervisor because you think you may get fired, talk to somebody. Right? Isolation isn't going to happen if you're out in the public, but man, I imagine there are guys sitting in cars surrounded by humans who feel completely alone right now in your profession.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then guys who come home and don't get to hang out with their buddies on the weekend and don't get to hang out with their girlfriend because she lives in another state and she's not flying in anymore. And so isolation is going to do a lot of damage during this if we don't find ways to connect. Mm-hmm. Right? I know a DJ here in Denver who literally just threw something up on Instagram and got 250 people into an hour-long dance party last night on Zoom. And if you think about it, that sounds absurd. But every one of those people was home alone and said, God, just to see people – I have a buddy who joined in. He's like, just to see people on the screen and remember that I'm not alone here made me feel so good last night. I'm so grateful that she did that. Right? And something stupid, like, yeah, let's have a fucking dance party. That's how, man. It's such a unique experience for everybody. There is no playbook. And so I think if we keep coming back to how do I take care of myself? How do I give myself those same things? A sense of safety, a sense of certainty, access to community, hope, and levity. Right? You guys are probably geniuses at making jokes about shit that's really inappropriate.
Very good.
Because you have to, like you and the medics, right? Like you've got to. So, I mean, figure out some good Corona jokes. Mm-hmm. Like someone today was like, don't you think they should have waited for the census and like sent the census out in a couple of weeks? And I was like, you can't say shit like that right now. But good point.
Well, I think the idea of community is a great place to end on. We both have ours. Traver, where can people find out about you and follow you and join in your community?
Beautiful. I am at on Instagram anytime at Traver Boehm, Traver Boehm. And my unique community, I call the Uncivilized Nation, is a phenomenal group of men, and access to joining them or application. It's super easy. I said, like, I've made it dirt cheap. It's like $25 a month. It is manuncivilized.com/the nation. And the conversations that those guys are having right now are so important because it's just guys being like, hey, I don't feel good today. Mm-hmm. Hey, I just lost my job. Right? And then boom, there's 5 other guys like, you know what? You're not alone. And you know what? If you need to, you can come live on my couch. There's stuff from that all the way to, hey, let's get on a call. Let's see, is there consulting you can do? Or just like, hey, you know what, brother? You're not alone in this. Oh. The whole gamut. So yeah, those places. I'm around, man. Like, I have made myself available, and I'm trying to make myself as available as possible through this because we're all in it together.
Well, it's not like you're going anywhere anytime soon anyway, right?
It's kind of landlocked. And it snowed here, so my little 2-wheel drive California truck can't fucking go anywhere anyway. So,
like, everybody who's listened to the show for any amount of time knows how close of a friend Traver is and his connection to the show from the very beginning. You sent me a screenshot yesterday from someone who had joined your group after hearing about you through the interviews here, and that just makes my heart explode. With the fact that we get to share your message and connect you with the right people. We also have the Squad Room podcast group on Facebook. You can join. You can follow us also on Instagram at the Squad Room if you want to reach out. We're going to be doing some more stuff in those platforms as the year goes on, especially during this epidemic. So, but I know that Traver, I know that you'll join me in wishing everybody as successful a week as they can possibly muster. It's going to be a different week than any of us expected a week ago. And we need to set our expectations appropriately, but that we are there in solidarity and in a compassionate friendship with all these other officers that are going through what they're going through right now, and that we are all in this together. And as Ron said, as I read at the beginning of the show, we will persevere and we will get through this.
For sure. And from my end, from the civilian population, thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts. You may not get it directly from people because they're too freaked out to tell you, but truly you guys are seen. What you're doing is seen. It's acknowledged. And you are the glue that's holding our society together. So truly, from the bottom of my heart, and everybody I know, and everybody who won't say it, thank you.